Hi there, everyone. Welcome back to Leadership Lessons. And I am excited about this week's episode. Each week I try to really pay attention to what I hear out in communities, within school buildings, within social media groups, within podcasts. And this one, of course, has been resonating this week. I think a lot of it has to do with it's the new year and we're gearing up to make sure we have great staff development, personal development plans for ourselves, and really moving forward so that we can make 2025 our best year. And I have to say, this week's topic is going to be great, especially if you're wanting to take your leadership skills to that very top level. I like the term if you want to go from good to great, because being a leader is not something you can do in isolation. I want to just kind of share my journey through work experiences in my adult life. I had my daughter at 19. I was in college. My ex-husband, who is her father, was just graduating high school, and we got married very shortly after. And at the time, I was my first year in when I got pregnant, barely in actually. And I was working at a restaurant where I met my ex-husband actually. So the two of us were working at the restaurant, and we worked there in high school. And we continued to work there once I got into college, and then he went, couldn't decide what he was going to do for school. And we just continued to work in our high school jobs. And then we had our baby. And so he continued to work there to help pay the bills. I continued to work there and then went to school as well. And we quickly learned that we weren't going to be able to make it on that salary. So he went and worked at a factory during the day, 40 hours a week. And I started working at a nursing home. I was a nurse's aide. And it was a pivotal moment for me because I was trying to decide, was I going to stay in the world of education, or maybe now I'd go into the world of nursing? Who knew at that point? I guess I did deep down inside, but I share those two job experiences because those were positions that when I went to work, I went to work. And when I came home, I came home. There wasn't anything that I needed to do at home at the end of the workday to be able to be ready for the next workday, except for make sure my laundry was done, make sure that my daughter had her stuff ready to go to daycare, and to make sure that I woke up on time, right? And his position was exactly the same. Going from the restaurant to the manufacturing company, he didn't have to bring anything home as well, like nothing home. And as we transitioned here to Houston and I started to become a teacher, it became a little bit different. I'd have to bring papers home to grade. I'd have to bring things home to plan, those types of things. But for the most part, I wasn't necessarily in a place where I had to prepare things other than what I was needing in my classroom. And eventually I got really good at that, and I could get most of that done at school. And then coming home would just be coming home. And he hopped around to a few different positions, but he worked for a cabinet maker, didn't have to do anything coming home. He worked for a technology company, didn't have to do anything to prepare to go into the next role. But as I started taking on leadership responsibilities and then moving up into leadership roles, it changed a little bit. I remember thinking, okay, I'm working the whole workday. Now I'm going to go home and I need to prepare this presentation for the next day or for the next week. And as I moved into the principal seat, assistant principal and principal seat, now it was, I need to write these staff evaluations at home. I share all of that because we go through this journey into our leadership role, and I'm sure every one of you would have had a similar experience where we're in positions where we don't have a ton of responsibility, and the workday is the workday. And as we build and grow, leadership becomes our whole persona. You can't separate. I even had a year where I'll never forget this, and I think I've shared this somewhere on the podcast before, but after our daughter went off to college, my ex-husband and I, we started trying to get out and about more often in the evenings. And Houston's huge, right? So I always said I would never work where I live. And if I went out socially, I didn't do it where I would possibly run into students. So we would go downtown, which is not where any of my students typically hung out, or any of my families, not close to our home, totally separate. And two experiences that happened that same year, we ran into families and students in places that the students probably shouldn't have been, but nonetheless, it made me realize that my leadership persona is a forever thing. It's a 24/7 type of thing. And somebody said to me once, well, that's because you're an educator. I don't think it is. I'm sure that a doctor, let's think of a chief of staff at a hospital, when they go out and about into the real world, they're still chief of staff at that hospital. When you think of a CEO of a high performing company, when they go out into their social world, they're still CEO of the high performing company. And even I had close friends that were partners in law firms that we would socialize with. They were still partners in the law firm when we were out and about socializing. So I have to say, leadership becomes encompassing in our lives. And I was listening to a podcast this morning while I was out walking the dog, and it was Layla Hermosi, and she was talking about things that lessons she's learned in leadership over the last years. And one of them hit me because it's so relatable to what I'm speaking about today. And she said, some lessons you need to learn as a leader. She had 10 of them, and this was like number 10, I think. But she said, you can't expect your personal life to be a mess and your leadership world be on target and everything is good. And I stepped back to think about that a little bit, because the year I was going through my divorce, I was having a very challenging personal life that year. Very challenging. There were days that I was just not myself. And I always said, I'm not going to allow this to spill into my work world, but it did. And there was another year in my journey where my leadership role was taking some hits, because we all experience that, right? And I said I would not let that run into my personal life, but it did. So today, the episode's not going to be very long, but I do want us to think about that. When we are fully living in harmony, I think we get this misconception that that means we take care of ourselves and we take care of our work, but it also means that we are positively impacting our leadership world and positively impacting our personal lives. And if there are gaps in our personal lives, then they're going to affect our leadership life and vice versa. One thing an exercise I did with a coach that I was working with last calendar year, she had us sit down and we drew a circle. And I may have shared this before on the podcast, but we drew a circle and we split it out into 6 sections. One section was personal development. One section was finance. One section was physical health. One section was mental health. One section was your social well-being. And then one section was your professional well-being. And we sat down and actually rated ourselves in each of those areas on this scale of 1 to 10, and how we felt about how that part of our life was going. It was a great visual activity for us to be able to go, if you don't feel like you're an 8, 9, or 10 in each of these components, how will it then affect the other components where you do feel like you're strong? And for me, transitioning from a structured 6-figure salaried position to being an entrepreneur, where 1 month I was bringing in money and 1 month I might be bringing in very little money, my financial world was taking a hit. I was using my savings, I was using credit that I had available to me. And in doing so, my emotional well-being was taking a hit. My social well-being was taking a hit because I was finding myself working all the time to try to be able to fix it, which then started to make my physical well-being falter. You get what I'm saying. So I would highly encourage you to sit down and look at that circle. Once again, it's your personal well-being, your professional well-being, your mental, your emotional, your physical, and emotional and social, your physical and your financial well-being, and rate yourself. And pick those that are not performing at an 8, 9, or 10 as areas to focus on this year so that you can start to bring everything back into harmony. All right, y'all. Hopefully this was an episode that gave you a little insight on this. And I will see y'all right back here next week on Leadership Lessons with Cheri.